I've had my ethnic background used as a card held against me as a means to not give credit for my work. Yeah. And
welcome to the Melanated Files. In this series, we highlight and share the stories of black people from across the globe. Remember to subscribe to this channel for weekly videos and also follow us on social media for regular updates. Let's get into the interview.
My name is Robert Namulala. I'm from Buffalo, New York. Why Japan? First question I should ask back is why not? I have a big interest in Japanese history, martial arts, science, and people. Lived in Japan a total of 4 years, and currently 3 years consecutively. I'm a researcher and an engineer, and I just recently retired from a research institute. So what's it like being a foreign black researcher in Japan? Woo-hoo. All right, hold on to your seats tight. It is pretty huge, not gonna lie. It's like being a celebrity and being James Bond. Literally. I've had to convince people that I'm not a 007 of sorts, and I'm probably understating that. In Japan and in Asia, East Asia particularly, I have not met another black researcher, except for my Polio hermanos, one of my friends back in the States. He is a Cubano, and he did a research exchange in Taiwan during his, I believe, during his PhD studies. Other than that, I've not met another black researcher from a Western country. I have met one from Tanzania. It says he has a friend from my tribe, and then I have also met 2 South Africans, and that's it in terms of the research institute. In terms of the non-research institute work that involved research and engineering, one person from Africa, and I consider him to be quite near and dear to me. And it's extremely limited. That's the limit of any African diaspora presence and Japanese research and engineering, particularly research. Very few if any, none at all. I have not yet met another Western black researcher at all. So many I don't even think I could fit in this video, I'm sorry. So what are the challenges faced being a foreign researcher in Japan? Okay, so for foreign researchers outside of myself, most foreign researchers in Japan that I have met do not speak advanced or beginning business level Japanese where I'd put myself at, given my work experience at a famous Japanese company. As a result, other foreign researchers outside of myself have been heavily mistreated, and I have personal friends who are above me in terms of research credentials that have held positions at the assistant professorial level at a famous university, have been greatly mistreated and quit their jobs as a result, going back to their Western country. It's extremely challenging given the language barrier and the nature of scientific or hard science research. It's very challenging, competitive. So when it comes to making private time for extracurricular activities, which is basically anything outside of science, potentially like learning a language, say Japanese, especially a challenging language like Japanese, you don't really have that much time or energy. You often are working free overtime potentially, which is common in the industry as a whole in the world, or at home even. That's something that many people outside of research may or may not be aware of, depending on their business and area of expertise and work. And often, because of the limitations of funding in this day and age around the world, people are forced to do research outside of their areas of expertise. Yeah, they have to broaden the market, or they have to broaden the way they market themselves. So I have a friend or acquaintance that has their doctorate in organic chemistry, and their current postdoctoral research is in an area involving electronics. I'll just say that. I'd like to be very private, discreet. So, I mean, organic chemistry and electronics are maybe not radically, but they're very different. And I myself have, throughout my beginning research career in Japan, have been doing research in areas that are all different from each other. So, in the United States, I was a National Science Foundation fellow, and my area of initial expertise for my graduate studies was involving bioengineering, biophysics, and oncology. Okay. For my undergraduate, I did computational mathematics, bioinformatics, computer science, and biophysics. And what I've been doing, or what I have done recently in Japan, have involved geographic information systems, satellites, AI, and theoretical physics. To be, as plain spoken as possible, those areas. So they're all radically different from each other. And so that biomedically related areas are my initial area of expertise. I wouldn't even consider myself an expert yet, but, because there's people that are, I would say, more knowledgeable. It just happens to be that my area of interdisciplinary research, where you're combining areas of science and engineering that haven't been combined before, it just happens to be something I have a talent and a knack for, that was, to my own personal surprise, greater than even my, scientific or computational science and scientific IT area of initial study for my undergraduate studies. So, having found out that I had a knack, so late in life, we're talking in my late 20s, early 30s, that was beyond what I thought I was originally good at. It was a happy surprise to me, and a lot of my professors back in the United States really still do to this moment, really encouraged me to get, my PhD and maybe a postdoc, or even start my own business. But I had such an interest in Japanese society and culture because of the Japanese community back in New York. And some of those people are working in the sciences, and they think of me like family. When I say think of me like family, I mean helping pay for my tuition, help me pay for my rent. When my own family was like, you're a Division I athlete, why don't you become a gym teacher, which is totally cool and respectable, instead of trying to, be a biophysicist or bioinformatist. So the Japanese community in New York really went out of the way to help me in and out of Japan. Okay, so that initial exposure to Japanese people, outside of just, a PlayStation game here or a manga or something to that effect, that was a little bit more eye-opening because, there's a lot of stereotypes of different peoples and cultures around the world, and having an uncle who's an African professor in New York who specializes in linguistic anthropology, you at a very young age, you get one-on-one teaching from a professor that stereotypes and reality are very different, and you get more of a in-depth education or understanding of world cultures at a very young age. So I remember my uncle teaching me that, like when I was in elementary school, that Japanese people don't call themselves Japanese, and he's like, they call themselves Nihonjin. I'm like, what? Mind you, I'm an elementary student. So it's like, yeah, Japanese people call Japan Nippon or Nihon, and people are Jin, and so therefore they call themselves Nihonjin. And I had to have been under 10 years old, under 10 years of age. The internet didn't exist in a public format back in the 80s, so I was pretty mind blown as an elementary student, and getting this kind of exposure at an educational angle, and then later on an acquaintance of my uncle who's also a professor but in the biophysical sciences. He recently passed away. Bringing me under his wing like an adopted son almost, and fitting the bill for me in some places when I had times trouble. That was like a real life-changing experience, and it really opened the minds of family and friends, because outside the Japanese community, I've noticed that a lot of people will think of Japanese people as being overly insular. If you have a genuine interest in their culture and you even attempt to speak the language as brokenly as it can speak it, they're quite open and welcoming. And throughout my struggles in Japan and even in America, that has actually that treatment has continued to endure on a large scale. So I guess there's a kind of a changing of times now with the information era. You have Japanese people want to keep the society as is, maybe more closed than not, and you have other people that think otherwise. And as a foreigner who can speak Japanese decently, I'm not fluent, I think it helps me more than hurts me overall. So getting into the parts that I don't like about being a researcher, or not just myself, but other researchers have this problem worse than I do, especially if they do not speak Japanese, is that in Japan you have problems that are common amongst Japanese people. Now, if you're a researcher and you don't speak Japanese, it only becomes worse. And those problems, which are commonly known to Japanese people as power harassment from a very highly structured hegemonious system that has limited accountability for how people are treated, it lends itself to becoming even worse situationally for people that don't speak Japanese. Okay, and in my situation, I'm lucky enough to be able to speak Japanese, but I actually was pressured by researchers who cannot speak Japanese. At least when I say can't speak Japanese, beyond not even intermediate, beyond basic conversation. I was pressured by them to speak out, and go to internal authorities within these workplaces. Okay, and often as a foreigner, and then adding on a Western, black person, I was gonna say person of color, but just black person, it gets more amplified when it comes to the prejudicial angle and discriminatory angles. And you often find that the power harassment can easily lend itself to being merged with discrimination. That's the part that really, maybe for the lack of a better word, triggers me. That makes me exceptionally angry. I've seen some unsavory things that I don't know if I can actually openly talk about, but of all the things I've experienced, that power harassment combined with blatant racism and discrimination using stereotypes, that has actually, that has annoyed me. Because in the United States, you have a lot of researchers of all different backgrounds, and it's very well understood, and there's a lot of systems and rules and accountability where people cannot be harassed on the basis of their ethnicity or their background or having children and stuff. In Japan, they do have some things, that systems to prevent and to deal with harassment, but compared to the United States, those systems and precautions have no teeth. They don't have any power. And that's what I've been finding out from other researchers coming to tell me, and they're not being able to speak Japanese. So when they're finished doing their postdoctoral studies or their contracts for the research job that they're doing, they often quit, go back to their country, or look for another job, and then eventually still end up going back to their home country in disappointment. And I feel bad because that power harassment, it's often coming from an area closer to the top of the power structure in Japanese companies or institutions, whereas the normal people, I don't want to say they love foreigners, but being an American who speaks Japanese, I feel like a VIP from the average person, average employee, whether they be working directly with me or working with a neighboring, group, either a company or institution. But the racism becomes really problematic and dangerous from the top, because some people will target you as a threat to the hegemony. I guess gikyokujo is the word for usurpation in Japanese. So seeing an educated minority, period, especially a black person, for some Japanese is considered to be a serious threat to that hegemonal structure. But for some Japanese who work in the more international business area, they see that as an opportunity, a business opportunity, to show how open and socially advanced they are. And for some people, they actually are. I've been quite impressed by certain individuals, including teacher turned politician and some other people. So you have this clash between people who are working in a more domestic sphere of research, whether it be corporate or institutional, versus people who are working in a more international sphere of work, whether it be both corporate or international. That's a dichotomy or a separation that I've been able to easily notice. So I've been called a spy by people far above me in the past, and I would hear on a weekly basis at some place I used to work where every week my supervisors were arguing with somebody above them, saying that I'm not a spy. So you have, that's the negative side of being a foreign, like American researcher in Japan. Some people will be very suspicious of you and think of you as a threat. The positive side, people will see you as, someone of the future, or a sign of the times, the changing times we're living in, the information era. And they will consider you a celebrity. So I actually have a lot of close contacts with Japanese people in research from previous points of employment to this very day, and they've helped me. So so this is an excellent question. Why hire foreigners for research? Well, some groups do not hire foreigners, and if they do happen to hire a foreigner and they're by and large Japanese only, it will only be for temporary purposes. And the risk that comes with that is you may not get credit for your work. and you might have to fight to get credit for your work. And I've been through that before, not once but twice. And it's extremely stressful because research is stressful. But then not getting credit for all that work you put in, that's even more stressful, and having to fight for it. And having people use your background as a card against you to discredit the work that you've done is extremely offensive, particularly your ethnic background. So I've had my ethnic background used as a card held against me as a means to not give credit for my work. Okay, and I've had to.
How do they do it?
Okay, so for example, very old-fashioned stereotypes involving people being hoodlums, for example, or lack of work ethic. Those type of stereotypes being used in writing. And I've heard from a very close Japanese friend that this happens among Japanese people. They'll make false reports or exaggerate reports against other Japanese people they don't like. But if you are a foreigner and you're the apple of someone's ire, as the expression goes, then that aspect of you being a foreigner, in my case, a black person, it's gonna be stacked on to that. So we're talking about things like, accused of being lazy when you've made a major contribution to a project, accused of being underproductive in writing, and people completely ignoring any work that you've done while they're using the work you've done at the same time. That makes it even that much more frustrating and angering. So one thing if they weren't using it, you can make the claim that, okay, maybe what you created or discovered is not of use, at least not at that time being. But if someone is using that information or thing that you've produced while making these accusations, that's very different then, because the facts are contrary to what is being said in such a situation. Yeah, the reason why I'm being discreet is because throughout these challenges, Japanese people with authority and power have helped me. Okay, so in some senses, the traditional power structure in Japanese companies and institutions for my specific situation as a Black American researcher have been broken by Japanese people to help me, to aid me in fighting such discrimination and abuses. And Japanese people at these foreign places of employment have actually helped me look for work in the same field in Japan in a more friendly or foreign-friendly atmosphere, and have helped me advance my career despite experiencing, some serious blatant harassment and discrimination. When I say blatant, I mean really blatant. Yeah.
You want to give some examples?
I do want to give examples, but I don't know if I should, because I don't know if it'd be giving away too much information. I guess, I'll give an example. The reason I'm nervous is that there are people that have been helping me that are Japanese people with and without authority in my field of work. Okay, so I want to be very discreet as to not hurt the people that I work with and may work with in the not too distant future. Okay, so I don't want to just use a broad stroke to paint all Japanese people in a negative light, because there are some people that are horrible, that will abuse their power to commit acts of harassment and discrimination, but there's also people that are giving me opportunities that I don't think would be as readily, well, they might be readily available, but how do I describe it? I don't think they would be offered to me almost on a platter like they have been in Japan by those more open-minded, powerful Japanese people, you know, from more political executive, like proper executive positions. So you have people with real authority, executive power that want to work with me, help me out, but you also have people with authority trying to discredit me, not give me credit for my work, while using my work, okay, and keeping it. Those people have abused, some of those people have abused their power to harass me and blatantly racially discriminate me with things like false accusations, blatantly false accusations. And some of those accusations are so based on stereotype and so ridiculous. Like, like for example, being accused of blasting loud music like you're having a party in an office that you share with other people. And one of those other people that you share your office with is actually actively like helping me find a job, you know, while I'm working at this job. So if I was as disruptive or misbehaved according to these hoodlum stereotypes and false reports, there'd be no reason for this non-Japanese foreigner to go out of their way, like seriously go out of their way to help me on a personal level with job hunting, you know, through social networking and whatnot. And they have. So I want to be very careful and discreet about these instances and how I portray them and how I say them, because I don't want to have too many identifiers and risks for people that I know that are wanting to work with me or have worked with me in a very positive way. For that reason, I want to be careful. What I want to come out of this interview is I've had people in the United States who look at me having decided to put a hold on getting my PhD and become a researcher in Japan, okay, from being an English teacher. And they look up to that a lot, you know, especially being in a foreign country that is not an immigrant nation like the United States or some parts of Western Europe. And they see it as a great feat. And that includes some people like my former former professor back in graduate school. And to some degree that is true. You know, I have some pride about what I've been able to have done, but because of these negative experiences that have taken a great toll on me and have caused a lot of stress, I don't want other people to basically attempt what I've done and have to go through the same thing. You know, if I were to go back in time, I might have gotten my PhD in the United States before coming here. But now I'm become so acclimated to living in Japan, and partly because of the welcoming nature of Japanese people in the research field especially, that despite some of these work abuses, I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not to stay or go. But a lot of people want me to stay who are Japanese. And the reason why they, as Japanese, would hire a foreigner outside of things I might have mentioned before is that having a native English speaker and having a IT background as a researcher is extremely valuable, extremely powerful, because you're able to do a lot more work, a lot more sophisticated work, having that computational background, and then being a native speaker of English. And a native speaker of English part that comes in handy for, you know, international conferences, publishing research papers, you know. But then the computer part in Japan, when it comes to scientific computing, there's a lot of jargon that's really difficult scientific jargon in English that Japanese IT people are not very familiar with, and even some Western people wouldn't be familiar with. And so there is a demand for, well, there's a shortage, not even demand, it's just a blatant shortage. So because of that shortage of people with computational science backgrounds and native English ability, I found myself, in these higher and higher positions in terms of ratings of the company or research institutions that I've been at, despite the contracts I've worked being very short. And that's what I at least personally accredit it to. And then on top of my education back in the States, having been a National Science Foundation fellow, that gave me a lot of training, prepared me for almost anything. Literally almost anything in terms of research, If I had a chance, why would I consider going back in time and getting my PhD in the States before coming to Japan? Part of the reason is in East Asia, titles matter a lot more than they would in the United States or the West, especially in a face culture like this. So if I had the title, which in some ways now I have the title, Dr. Namulala, it would be highly unlikely that people would be motivated to not give credit and or take credit for my work because of the power, the social power associated with that title that comes with your name. And that's something that's unique to Japanese research culture, whether it be corporate or non-corporate. That's something that I've learned very different from the United States. Now, still in a lot of areas, you won't be taken seriously if you don't have a PhD. But I think people like Elon Musk or a lot of Silicon Valley billionaires have pretty much trashed that cliche and disproven it. But you don't have that type of entrepreneurial culture in East Asia that you have in the West. And as a result of that, the title has a lot more power and influence, and a lot of the problems I'm having, I can't say that people wouldn't be prejudicial or discriminatory, but they would definitely hold back a lot farther, if I had that title to come along with my name. And henceforth why I said I might consider having, got my PhD before coming to Japan. That's why. So it's a difference in culture between the East and West when it comes to research and presentation. So if I had my PhD before coming to Japan, I wouldn't have been would have not been able to be put into a situation so easily where I'm hired as a researcher, but then my work contract is that of a Japanese non-researcher, okay? And so I've been working as a researcher and even have the title within some components of my work as a Dr. Namulala, which could be seen as maybe, not honorific, I'm thinking in terms of Japanese, but it could be seen as a plight or manners, but I am doing actual research related to theoretical physics, okay? But then theoretical physics has nothing to do, and you can argue if you want, but it has nothing to do with engineering, okay? So these are blatantly two very different areas. Okay, you can make an argument that they're not, but by and large, theoretical physics, engineering are two different areas. So I'm working and doing research, or did research in theoretical physics, but my Japanese worker contract says that I'm an engineering assistant. Okay, now that has been held against me, so I'm being made to do research, but I'm not allowed to spend time with my other research colleagues because my contract, being a Japanese workers contract, I'm not allowed to have even a coffee break technically. But researchers are obviously allowed to have, you know, conversational meetings or breaks, kind of a mix of a downtime, but still working, you know, more casually discussing new ideas and ways to go about their work. And so my partaking in these kind of research-related, not kind of, but research-related conversations, mixed with a lot of bad jokes and funny stories in between, that actually was how I was taught some areas of theoretical physics that are outside of my initial area of knowledge or expertise, you know, in mass spectrometry, matrigel, biosurface material sciences, and engineering. Okay, those areas that I just mentioned are different theoretical physics. So not having a PhD has been held against me in that regards of people being able to arbitrarily enforce rules against me as a foreigner that otherwise would not be applicable because of the nature of my work. So there's a lot more gray area from not having a PhD. But since I was able to complete this work, demonstrably complete this work, Japanese people, researchers in particular, and people of an executive level have presented that they want to work with me, okay, on a more international level. And that could be seen as the more positive aspect, you know, of having endured this. But because of the experience now, I'm more seriously considering just going back to get my PhD, so that it can never happen again. Because this is the second time, or it's happened to me 2 times, this type of situation where, you know, not having a PhD has been a detriment. Either people trying to take or not give credit to me for my work, or, you know, having rules arbitrarily or unfairly enforced on me where they may not be applicable, you know, which in a way is a form of harassment. Okay, so that's a great question. What I encourage foreign researchers to come here, if they know who they want to work with, and if that person is well-traveled among Japanese people, you know, like say they've been outside of Japan. This is advice I've gotten from my professors back in the United States. For being a non-Japanese person wanting to do research in Japan, I would encourage you to do it, but just be very careful and make sure that the area and the people, the individuals that you're planning to work with have international exposure. And when you start doing research and you're, you know, signing contracts and being interviewed, make sure you very openly state that you have certain requirements about working atmosphere, creative space, personal freedoms, so that you don't have the type of negative situations that have gone through. Okay? So I would state, yes, it's worth it. Japan is definitely changing, and changing for the better. But to avoid some of the pitfalls or negative experiences that I have endured, yeah, you should be very aware of who you would like to work with, and, you know, make sure that they are internationally traveled and versed themselves, and that you lay down the ground rules in terms of the style of work, because the way that Japanese do research very often is different than how Westerners specifically do research. The way, the style and manner of work is very different. And that's known among East Asian researchers and Western researchers. So you just gotta make sure that you lay that ground, because there's some Japanese that are, you know, they're taking their own personal time to increase their cultural knowledge of the world, increase their English ability, and want to work with foreigners, but they may not be fully aware of the cultural differences themselves in terms of their work. You know, they may not be fully aware, and we have some ideas here and there. And, you know, with the Olympics coming, and Japan getting positive exposure to the outside world, yeah, a lot of people in both industry and academia are trying to open up. But, you know, you have to be very clear about these things, because there's so many countries outside of the world outside of Japan. So the way that you do work and where you're from versus maybe where you were trained in your area of research, because research is very international, it may affect, you know, how you go about your work. And you need to be very forward and for the get-go about that to avoid any possible misunderstandings or negative situations in the long run in the future. So that's really important. General attitude. Whew. What is the general attitude towards black people here? A chiropractic doctor told me black people are very powerful. The attitude towards black people is powerful. We're seen as being very powerful. Just African diaspora, period. And the word I mentioned before, gekyokujo, usurpation, is a fear by some people at the top. But for many normal Japanese people, their attitude towards seeing a black American, or at least a black American of education, is inspiration. Because a lot of Japanese themselves don't have the jishin or confidence themselves to go against the grind to change their own society. So I've been to bars with former English teachers turned engineers talking about, you know, research and development and culture differences between Japan and the United States, and have said maybe truthful but negative things about the Japanese efficiency or work environment, and been confronted by Japanese people in happiness. So I was expecting to have a potential bar fight, or, you know, thinking someone's gonna, like, you know, threaten me. But instead, I've had young Japanese males tell me, you know, their famous company with hand gestures is going down after mentioning these type of cultural problems that I've experienced. And I've had young Japanese men, you know, come into my personal space and shake my hand, you know, vigorously, like, and smile. And I'd ask them, you know, because I'm not sure, are you Japanese? And they, yes, I'm Japanese. Like, probably they're Japanese. I was like, okay. I was kind of surprised that Japanese youth, okay, particularly youth, would look at a black person as a source of inspiration for fighting what they perceive as a social problem that's affecting them negatively, a lack of change in the situation. And so the attitude towards black people is people with individual strength that may be, that strength could be seen as positive or negative depending on the Japanese individual. But I think, yeah, being in a position of strength in East Asian culture is probably a good thing, you know. So it garners some respect with it, and that's something I guess I like. Yeah, that's the attitude we're seen as people of strength, intellectual, physical, character, and that's what I've learned in my journey here so far. So, a positive aspect, despite a lot of hardships, has made me want to stay here a little bit longer. I don't know if I want to stay in Japan for the rest of my life, but I definitely want to spend some more time here for sure. What do I like the most about Japan? Okay, what I like about Japan so much, after being here for about 4 years total, is that the language, the culture, and the people give me so much perspective on how to see the world in a whole different light. That knowledge and perspective is a power. It's a serious power. And I've had famous professors from Europe research professors from Europe come to me recently face to face and tell me that, this perspective that I have, from living here and being an African American, of a very diverse background, is a power. And I thought about that in my own time, but to actually hear it verbalized by someone who's considered somewhat a little bit famous in their area, that felt good. It is empowering. It felt empowering, and I guess it made me like the society more. The knowledge and power that I gained from learning about this society, its history, how people live and do things, which is so very different than where I'm from in New York State, has actually given me a lot of power in knowledge. I feel like if I wanted to go on a venture and make a company, or work with people in other parts of the world, in or out of Asia, I think I have so much perspective from being here. I could look at things differently and make more educated guesses or plans, and how I approach life from at least a business perspective or a scientific perspective, because of my experience living here. It's very complex and nuanced, but that knowledge is extremely powerful here. Yeah, and I would say my nickname at work, from a postdoctoral researcher, I don't want to say where they're from particularly, but they gave me the nickname Caesar, and it wasn't made as a joke. It wasn't given to me to mock me. It was given in admiration, and I never ever thought a European postdoc who has their own seminars, big seminars, like a big conference room seminars, would look up to me, not even having a PhD, and give me a nickname like Caesar. That changed, and I don't want to say it made me cocky, because I've dealt with a lot of struggles related to my ethnic background in Japan and my work environment, but it gave me a boost beyond just the struggles, to really understand, wow, people look up to me. So I feel, I guess invigorated in some sense, and I want to share that knowledge and power with other people back home in the States. And that's why I've come to this channel, to tell my story, even though I have to kind of tone it down a bit, just because things, I'm still working right now in my field, and I plan to continue working in the sciences, in the research. But I think it's really important to get that story out of my experiences now, so that other people in my situation or in my shoes, I'm not coming from wealth or anything like that, they can feel confident when they go to the world, out in the world, to do their work in the sciences and research and make a real strong impact like I have done here. And they'll be more prepared than I was, because I still haven't met another Black American researcher. There might be other ones here. I'm not going to say there aren't, they don't exist, but there's so few, I would say, like, I guess a pioneer of sorts, a social or cultural pioneer of sorts. So there's other people, that are going to imitate, or maybe not imitate, but have similar hopes or dreams and aspirations in their life. And now if they were to happen to come by this story through this channel, or hear about it from a family member or friend, I think they'll be able to make a much deeper impact than I even had. And that's what I want to contribute socially, not just to industry or science as a whole, but to society. I would like to really give this knowledge and information. At one place of employment, I made a user-directed AI that processed information from a satellite and then linked other software in that processing as well. It's very, very complex. satellite information that's processing, that at a previous point of work was being done manually, and people would sometimes make mistakes. So the AI basically eliminated those mistakes or human error from the processing. And I was told after I left that place of employment by a former coworker that they're still using it. So I would assume then that means it's pretty good, or at least decent, to say the least. All right, so I mean, in layman's terms, AI, it's a satellite AI that works with, you know, certain technology involving farming. I'll just leave it at that. I'll have to leave it at that. The other thing that I made was a density functional theorem database on a supercomputer, and it is of LED phosphorus crystals. DFT database is something that I created, you know, with minimal assistance. I remember checking supercomputer, you know, 3 a.m. sometimes from my house, you know. So I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Okay. Let me just give one piece of advice. If you get an informal job offer from NASA, like I have before, no matter where you're working, take it and run. No matter what else is going on in your life, take it. Don't turn it down like I did. I would say that's a mistake in my life that I made. I regret it. Not saying that I can't go back, but you know, maybe with my tail between my legs. But yeah, if you get an offer from NASA and science or engineering, don't turn it down. Take it. Or some other big brand name science research, you take it. Yeah, that's my big piece of advice. If people want to come here, learn Japanese, make the effort to learn technical Japanese, even if you're not able to remember the complex kanji, at least in Romanji. Do not get stuck in a gaijin bubble. Now, don't ignore people who are non-Japanese. Like, don't ignore people that may be a part of a gaijin bubble, but don't limit yourself to the gaijin bubble, because if you do that, you're not going to be able to learn well-spoken Japanese, okay? And it'll limit your opportunities in Japan. If you speak Japanese naturally from spending time with Japanese people of authority will be able, of power, will notice you speak Japanese from having conversated socially with Japanese people, and will garner a lot more trust and opportunity than just, say, studying in a textbook, going to a class once a week, okay? That's good too, and that's something I even need to do more of myself. But learning Japanese that's naturally spoken, colloquial Japanese, and even Korean, I speak some Korean as well, is extremely important, and that will, no matter what shape or color you are, will give you leaps and bounds of opportunity in Japan that even to my, I mean, and kind of blow me away even at this moment. So I highly recommend you do that. Learn spoken Japanese from, you know, social circles of Japanese people, but do not ignore friends or acquaintances that are maybe in a gaijin bubble of the sorts. Given they may not have the time, power, energy to learn Japanese as well as you can, but you really should go learn as much spoken Japanese from Japanese people as possible. That's one thing that's helped me tremendously. I cannot say enough. The common misconception of life here is that it's peaceful and safe. Physically, in some sense, yes, it's peaceful and safe, but in terms of how the society actually operates, it's not always peaceful as safe as it seems on the outside. There's a lot of social pressures, a lot of harassment, or psychological than physical. And the psychological pressure and stress caused on people can actually be just as damaging, if not more damaging, than some physical, damage in terms of the long-term effects. That's something I say, and that's why I've really, made it a point to come to this channel and tell people what I've gone through, because some of the psychological experiences that I had from working in Japan as a researcher and an engineer, they're big experiences, huge experiences, but I'd say for some of them I wish I had never had experienced at all. I'd wish that I have never experienced them all. And I've plainly stated that to coworkers who look up to me maybe from a higher formal position. So, there's not many people in Japan that are foreigners that have been able to do research both in public and private. I'll just say that's all I can really say. I have, and there's a lot of experiences that I've had that have, probably psychologically stay with me for the rest of my life, and I'd rather not have that happen to other people. And so I'm here telling you my story as discreetly as possible. I have awareness of how it might affect me, but just because of how these experiences have affected me, I've made it a real point to get it out so that other people don't have the same negative experiences I've had in Japan. And that's why I'm here today talking to all of you. Yeah. What deserves more media coverage in Japan? I believe that the media here, when it covers foreigners outside of Japan, sometimes the news takes a tone of entertainment, and it might cover silly or absurd or criminalistic aspects of foreign societies and culture. I don't think there's enough positive news coverage of just foreign countries and cultures in general. And even more so when it comes to, African Americans or say developing countries. The media doesn't have enough positive coverage of the outside world, and I notice how that kind of affects negatively the lives of other researchers in Japan. They're not necessarily treated as well as they should be, and they're not thought of in terms of a modern light and modern perspective. So, yeah. My email that I usually go by is namulala@gmail.com. So if you're wondering, I did my undergraduate studies at the State University of New York, and for my graduate studies, I went to Roswell Park Cancer Institute, which is the oldest cancer hospital in North America. It is also affiliated with the State University of New York as well.
Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to share your story or have us visit your region, send us a message on any of our social media platforms or via our website.
That's good.